Hey everyone, and welcome to this video. I'm Glenn, and this is episode 18 of the Oathsworn painting series. In this episode, I'm painting the Avi Harbinger. If you're new to miniature painting, I hope you find this video interesting and helpful. If you enjoy what I do, please hit the like button and leave a comment. As usual, let's see how I brought this mystical fortune teller to life. Let's begin. First, I removed all the mold lines by using a hobby knife and filled all the gaps by using the mixed sprue glue. Once the glue dried, I washed and cleaned the model in soapy water, rinsed it in clean water and let it dry. Then I primed the model white using an airbrush. This can also be applied by using a can of white primer. Now we're all set and good to go. Starting with the base, I use speed paints, following the method from previous videos. If you're interested in more details about this process, check out episode 3, there is a timestamp in the description of that video. Next I move on to the model itself, also using speed paints in shades of purple. I'm alternating between Hive Dweller Purple and Periwinkle Purple on the tabards to add variation. For the cloak, I incorporate a touch of blue. While on the upper body, I focus more on Periwinkle Purple. A hint of blue is also used on the arms. The weapon received a coat of Periwinkle Purple. With the first coat complete, the model looks something like this. I apply a second coat using a mix of purple and grey speed paints on the tabards I want to appear purple. And Periwinkle Purple for the tabards I want to look more blue. I skip a second coat on the cloak and from there I continue with the armor, upper body, arms and the weapon. Next, I start layering and highlighting the tabards, using the colors shown on the banners. For the purple tabards, I layer Nagaroth Night and Fenrisian Grey, building up from the shadows to the more exposed areas. For the bluish tabards, I layer with a mix of Sirius Purple, Kaeldor Sky and Fenrisian Grey. I decided to brighten up the purple tabards to keep them balanced with the blue. If needed, you can always use speed paints again for shading or correcting mistakes. And here I finish by edge highlighting all the tabards. Using a similar process, I work on the cloak, combining both mixtures used earlier. I brighten the lower part of the cloak and create a gradient by alternating thin layers of the mixtures, building a smooth transition from purple at the top to blue at the bottom. To achieve this, I use wet blending. I first apply the blue layer, then switch to purple while the blue is still wet on the cloak, allowing the colors to blend smoothly and create a neat gradient. Keep in mind this can take multiple layers to achieve. Let each layer dry before applying the next to avoid removing or ruin the previous layers. To finish the cloak, I edge highlight and blend by wiping the color with my finger for a softer effect. I apply the same process to the fabrics around the shoulders. And with the fabrics complete, let's move on to the metal parts. I start with a light coat of Dark Reaper on all the metal parts. I will be using the colors shown on the banners. Next, I decide on focal points along each armor piece and begin layering from these spots. You will notice a back and forth between colors throughout this process, as I alternate between highlights and shadows to simulate reflections and depth. I also highlight the edges to enhance the shape. Using the same approach, I create a focal point at the end of each armor piece. And for added detail, I incorporate reflections in tones of purple and blue. These are placed towards the shadows of the armor. After this, I refine the focal points for a cleaner finish. This process is applied to all the metal parts, including the gauntlets, portions of the decoration on the stomach and chest, and also the metal piece at the end of each tabard. While I use shades of purple on the armor pieces, I added shades of green and brown to the metal pieces at the end of each tabard for variation and depth. For the gold areas, I use the colors shown on the banners. Starting with a Rhinox hide basecoat. I follow up with a layer of Mournfang brown. Now I gradually layer towards the more exposed areas, as I just did with the metal parts. I dilute a yellow color and apply it as a glaze to make the area appear slightly more yellow and to blend the colors together. Next, I use white to place the focal points. For added definition, I create an extra focal point along the armor piece. Here I define an edge above the decoration for extra detail. Finally, I add a tiny touch of white along the edges and focal points on the armor. This gold technique is applied to the shoulders and parts of the chest and stomach decoration. With the metal and gold areas complete, the model looks something like this. Now let's move on to the body parts. I start by adding small thin lines as texture to the visible parts of the body, like the arms, legs, stomach and neck. Next, I use a thin coat of purple to gently fade or blend this texture into the surface. Then I apply another coat of texture, focusing only on the most exposed areas. This process was repeated on the stomach, arms, legs and neck. For the hands and feet, I start with a blend of purple and brown. And gradually working in more brown as I build up the layers. I also bring in bone white to add a bit of highlight. For the final touch on the talons, I use bone white and Oathsworn grey. Followed by a thin coat of purple to unify the colors. This same process was applied to the other hand as well. For all the feathers, I start by applying a purple base coat. Using a mix of Naggaroth Night and Fenrisian Grey, I layer the feathers to build up a gradient, from purple to pink. Next, I use Screamer Pink and move the layer towards the tips of the feathers. Here I use Warlord Purple and move the layer even further towards the tips. I use the purple mix again to clean up some areas and create gradients. I apply a touch of a pink mix along the feather's edges, focusing on the areas that transition into pink. I then highlight the edges of the feathers using Fenrisian grey. Followed by a pink highlight at the very tips. To add texture, I apply thin lines of Fenrisian grey onto the blue areas and bright pink onto the pink areas. I finish with a thin coat of pink and purple for added depth. This texture technique is also applied to the feathers on top. Moving on to the face, I start painting the jaw in a similar manner to the hands and feet, using tones of purple, brown and off-white. For the face, I begin with a base coat made from the mix of purple and brown. Then I shade it slightly with a thin coat of purple. Now I begin another layering process, applying tones of brown and off-white. I painted the eye sockets yellow and followed up with a black pupil. Then I finished with a small white dot. For the symbol on the forehead, I mix black and white to create tones of grey. I also use white to refine and clean up mistakes. For the weapon, I start with a brief coat of Dark Reaper. Throughout this process, I'll be using the colors shown on the banners. From there, I begin to gradually building up the focal points using the non-metallic metal method. You will notice a back and forth between colors throughout this process, as I alter between highlights and shadows to simulate reflections and depth. This includes a mix of techniques like wet blending and stippling, which help to create neat transition and add texture to the metallic surface. For some of the dark areas on the blades, I also use purple and brown to create a gradient. And towards certain focal points, I also incorporate ghost green and dawn yellow. For the blade edge that points towards the ground, which is the less exposed, I decided to blend in green and brown. Here you can see I painted the less exposed blade edge much darker than the exposed one. I use this process on all the edges and continue on the midsections. I highlight all the scratches with white. For the swirling decoration around the staff, I painted it similarly to the blades. However, capturing the footage was tricky because I had to twist and turn the model constantly due to its complex shape. This actually caused some of the paint on the gold areas on the shoulder to rub off, so I had to repaint these areas, which is why I decided to separate the arm from the body. And the staff holding the blades is painted in a dark metal finish. Moving back to the tabards, I decided to add more freehand. I start with a mix of pink and off-white. To correct and refine the symbols, I use mixes similar to those I applied when I layered and highlighted the tabards, depending on whether the symbol is on a bluish or purple-ish tabard. Here I continue adding details to the symbols. And with the symbols complete on this tabard, I refine them even further. On one of the tabards, I made a mistake and found that it became too bright, so I went back in with speed paint to darken it. I use a mix of purple and pink to tone down the symbols in the less exposed areas. And as the final touch on the symbols, I use bone white to brighten them up a bit. With the symbols complete, they look something like this. For the base, I paint it as I have done in previous videos, using tones of yellow, green, brown and off-white. Then I go the 2 laps around the base rim with a black color. I attached tufts, leaves, flowers and plants to the base using superglue. And then I gave the model a coat of Matt Varnish for a matte finish and to protect the paints. And with that, let's have a look at the final result.
The Avi Harbinger. It is only those few who find themselves shoulder to shoulder with one in battle that will understand the truth. I remember the time we fought alongside in Avi. We were deep within the treacherous shadows of the Deepwood, surrounded by horrors that defied imagination. It was there I saw the eyes in the shadows that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of time itself, waiting for the perfect time to strike. Without a word, the Avi leapt into the fray, cloaked in robes and feathers. I watched in awe as it moved with grace, its every motion calculated, its every strike precise. Though its words often confounded us, we quickly learned to trust its foresight. When the Avi spoke, it was in riddles, yet its words guided us through the perils that awaited. As we stood at a crossroads, uncertain of which path to take, the Avi would gesture and lead the way. We would walk atop the fallen trees, heeding its cryptic warnings as we traversed uncharted territory. Ground beneath the fallen trees ushers in new dangers. None were sure what this meant, but we would soon find out. Sven the smith from the company fell on seemingly normal soil, only to be dragged down by piercing tentacles. He screamed in agony as the underfoot consumed him. Poor Sven. Finally, after days of walking, we settled at a cliffside where a clear path to our destination lay ahead. Before the Avi departed our company, it left us with one last cryptic message, as if answering a question we hadn't even asked. I hold no crystal certainty for the days ahead, yet, as dawn awakens, within your company's presence, I glimpse the emergence of a rising sun, casting enigmatic light upon the path we tread. Accursed creatures stand at our gates, and the Painting Chronicles Brotherhood stands at the ready to face this evil. Join our cause by subscribing, and we shall triumph together. Pillar and Path Brothers. Also like and comment.